What is the most intoxicated you have ever been? I took mushrooms. I decided to mix this with some grass and booze too. Not huge doses of any of the three. It was just my now ex and I, aiming for a fun night of mushrooms and giggles and music together. It was unlike any mushroom trip I've ever had. Usually it would be a combination of beautiful colors, breathing and moving patterns, childlike wonder at the most random things, and an enhanced appreciation of music. Intimacy so great that it would usually leave me paralyzed and drooling. That type of stuff. I actually don't really remember the come up, but when things got weird, my boyfriend and I were lying in bed, cuddled up to each other, just talking and laughing. For a moment, we had both gone pleasantly quiet and he was laying with his eyes shut when his eyes shot open and he was animatedly explaining something to me, right in the middle of a sentence, no context at all. So I'm laughing my butt off about this, until he explains to me that no, he had been talking to me for at least a little while before that. It began to dawn on me that I had apparently just blacked out, whether that was for a few seconds or minutes, I had no idea, although I was somewhat aware of the time, enough to know it couldn't have been any longer than maybe 10 minutes max. This really freaked me out, and I wondered if I had had an absence seizure or something. My boyfriend tried to comfort me, but I began to notice that he seemed to be having what looked like micro-sleeps, getting more frequent. Since the initial blackout, I was having this ever-growing feeling, I can only describe as being as if parts of my brain were transitioning into some other type of brain wave that was not usually experienced while awake. We wound up laying together, my face against his chest, and he seemed to fall asleep. I closed my eyes and decided to surrender to this feeling of separating brain waves. I felt incredibly calm, like my breathing was slowing. My heart was slowing. My whole body and metabolism was just slowing, shutting down. I was very at peace, no out-of-body experience, but I figured that this was passing away, and I was alright with the idea. At this point my boyfriend says I stood up, went up the fridge, picked out a raw carrot, cut it up, put some salt on it, and put it on a sandwich and went back to bed. Only problem was I put the carrot, shout out Beetlejuice, in the toaster and was perfectly content eating my toasted carrot. After eating I went back into the same slumber of peace. Making peace with passing away, then I thought of how awful it would be for my boyfriend to wake up and find me unalive next to him. Some part of me began to panic, but it was an absolute fight to combat that peacefulness and bring myself back. I sat up, and woke my boyfriend up and told him I thought I was having a panic attack, and felt like I had passed away. For the record, we're both nurses, he with much more experience than I. I asked him to sit up and talk to me, which he did, but kept leaning in to rest his head on my shoulder and seemed to fall asleep each time. I felt as though I had no automatic drive to breathe, like I would just stop if I wasn't thinking about it, and asked him to coach me through breathing. He did, but his instructions were to slow my breathing down. From my perception it seemed that I wasn't breathing at all. I kept telling him, I feel like I'm dead. When I looked down at my hands and legs, I looked gray and mottled. Then I began to stumble over my speech and my hands became itchy. I started to smell burning skin, which was not there. I began unloading my past trauma to my boyfriend. I opened up about how my uncle forced himself onto me, all while crying and laughing. I remember telling my boyfriend to try my clothes on because it would be funny. I brought a knife into the room and admired its sharpness. I gave him a speech about how he just trusts me with his life right now and how I trust him with mine. I then started bawling. I hallucinated my best friend in the corner of the room, who had took her life a year ago. She was there, I could see her. I stood up and ran to hug her, only nothing was there. My boyfriend laid me down and held me in his arms. When I would look around the room, I knew it was my own room, but everything just seemed off in some indescribable way, like I was in some alternate reality. My boyfriend began to ask me if I trusted him, and encouraged me to give in to the trust. I told him that seems like a very odd thing to say to someone who is basically having a psychotic episode. I really feared that this might now be a permanent state for me and convinced myself that the only way out of this for me was to take a cold shower. In the shower, I slipped and fell. I hit my head fairly hard and had to be rushed to the hospital. The injuries were nothing major and within 12 or so hours I was sober again just with a headache. My boyfriend left me 2 days later.